Recovery webinar series. When we're done, probably this week, maybe early next week, we're hoping to send out just a couple questions, and if you could fill them out just to help us get some feedback on what you guys thought of the webinars, any topics you think we should keep, you want to learn more about, anything else, any thoughts. So we just appreciate if you could take the time to do that. Also, hopefully next week, if you did attend all 3 webinar series, we'll hopefully get your certificate sent out as well. We're just a little bit busy here at NEMA. If you didn't realize, we had somewhat of a blizzard issue the 13th through the 15th, so the staff here has been a little bit busy, but we hope to get those out next week as well. As always, if you have multiple people sitting in under one registration, please go ahead and post that either in the chat to one of the NEMA staff or send me an email just so we can make sure everyone's kind of getting credit for your attendance. Also, the same as the last 2 weeks, NEMA staff is standing by on the chat, so feel free to post to everyone or send them a private chat, and we will try to answer your questions as we go. Okay, so this is the third of 3, like I said, Blue Sky Day, understanding how to prepare today. We'll get going. So today's agenda is just going to look like some tips and about 6 different things that you guys can be working on and thinking about when you're not in a disaster time. So we'll just be looking into current processes, what you guys are doing, and maybe some modifications just to make it more simple when you do have a disaster and easier for FEMA to understand. Also examining procurement procedures. And then at the end, we will be logging into the grants portal system. I'll do a brief live demo. As Patrick just stated in the chat, and I have up here, if you are what we would call an authorized representative of a public entity, and you have not sent your information for the grants portal, please get your entity name, contact name, phone number, and email. You can send it to Patrick. I think it's NEMA Patrick or Patrick NEMA in the chat, or shoot him an email, and during this webinar he can hopefully send you an invitation link. Please realize that that invitation link also requires you guys to accept it, and then it will go back to Patrick and he'll approve it. So just him sending the invitation does not get you in the portal. It does take a little bit of effort for you guys, but we'll hopefully get you guys in. So when we do the live demo today, it'll look a little bit different because as the state entity, we are the grantee, and so I can see everyone's in the state. But I'll be able to get in there and show you guys what it'll look like from your guys' perspective a little bit, and show you how to do some just different actions within that portal. Okay, so the last 2 webinars have been action-packed, as interesting, I guess, as we can make disaster recovery. And Donnie last week really talked about damage assessments, how we get our disaster, how as a county you guys reach your threshold, and if you were part of that blizzard, you're right in the middle of this right now. Right now we are trying to make sure everyone has submitted declarations. We're seeing which counties have hit their thresholds. And can someone really quick on the chat just make a note that you guys can still hear me? Just making sure who's hit their thresholds. And as Donnie spoke about this process, and I followed up on this as well, that process here where the check marks, this is going to be changing a little bit with the new portal. RPAs will be submitted in the portal. No longer called a kickoff meeting, actually. So these things have changed a little bit, but that was really webinar 1. Thank you, everyone. So go back to webinar 1 if you want to get some more information on that. And then we did talk about how projects get obligated. We didn't really talk about closeouts, really. Maybe that's another topic that we can do another webinar on. But we really covered a lot of information the last 2 webinars. And at the end, I will show you guys where those are posted. The live webinar recording, as well as just the PowerPoint, are on our NEMA website under Recovery and Public Assistance. So if you want to share this information with a friend or go back later, that is all online now. So like I said, this is really what we've talked about today. Is going to be focused on Blue Sky Day. What can you be doing now for those of you that are not included in the blizzard? What can I be doing now to get ready? So the first thing we really would recommend, and we've touched on this so far both weeks, is review the most current public assistance program and policy guide. This looks familiar once again. We have updated our website to include the most current guide. We actually have the last 3, so it should cover the majority of the disasters that people are in the middle of right now. And as we get new versions, we will continue to put that on our website. But really take some time just to look through it. Maybe if you're a roads department, look at the specific category C requirements. If you're a finance person, look at the specific documentation requirements. It is a 217-page document, but the electronic version really isn't too bad. There's a lot of charts and graphs and different things that make it pretty user-friendly. So take a look at that. And like I said, and I think Donnie said, this newest version, January 2018, any disasters that do occur from this point until we get a new version will fall into that new January 18 guidance. The second thing, we're going to be camping out on this topic for a little while, is review and update procurement policy and requirements. So don't get intimidated by these slides. There's a lot of words. I'm not going to read them all, but I just really wanted to have the information on the slide for you guys to come back and reference because it's very important. Federal procurement standards are applicable to federal awards, and they can be found in Title II of the CFR. You can see that referenced multiple times. I do want to highlight a really good resource, and at the end I have some links. But the Procurement Disaster Assistance Team is a group of individuals from FEMA that does help provide resources to help public assistance applicants just comply with federal requirements. So like I said, I'll be posting that link. And there's some really great resources actually on that page. There's a field manual that goes over procurement standards. There's a compliance checklist that you guys can utilize alongside when you're creating contracts and bidding out contracts, just to make sure you do have all the required clauses. There's, to piggyback, a required clauses template on that website as well. There's a cost and price analysis guide, and they actually have a really good webinar series too that's broken up into some different topics. So if you do have very specific procurement questions, the NEMA staff will always be a resource. We'll always try to help you the best we can. But truth be told, none of us are contract specialists. None of us are attorneys. So we're going off what we've researched, experience, auditing and experiences. Do utilize your county attorneys. Those of you that have county attorneys, city attorneys, they would be a great resource for this contracting information. But we'll kind of dive into procurement, and if you have questions, specific questions, like I said, let's direct those to Donnie. So essentially, why I'm talking about this now is before an event is definitely the time that we need to be talking about procurement. Usually when an event happens, we get caught up in the emergency and just getting people out there to repair and replace, and by then we have contracts let out that might not be allowed, or just some processes have occurred that it's almost too late to go back. So we really want to push this information out and educate people before the event to help prevent loss of funding later on. So applicants must comply with federal procurement requirements as a condition of our PA grant. Federal procurement standards for state and territorial governments, are different than those for tribal and local. So for our state entities, you must follow the same policies and procedures you would use with non-federal funds. Comply with 2 CFR, procurement of recovered materials, and ensure that every purchase order or other contract includes any clauses required by the 2 CFR. So definitely get on to the PDAT site and just make sure that we do have all the required clauses. This is something that we have come up against a couple times, several times actually, just not having the required clauses in our contracts. So that's a simple thing that we can make sure that we are putting in contracts even during non-disaster times to make sure that we are compliant. For our non-state applicants, these are our local governments, our towns, villages, county governments. As non-state applicants, you must use your own documented, so I want to underline documented because usually people say, it's just kind of how we always do it. I want to reiterate that if you do not have documented procurement procedures, right now is a great time to get some written up and reviewed. They must reflect applicable state, territorial, tribal, and local laws, provided that they conform to applicable federal laws. So what this is saying is you can follow your own procurement procedures as you would at any other time, as long as they include state and federal laws. And essentially a way to think of this is you have to follow the most strict. So as long as you're following the most strict, you should be fine. So that's just something to think about. We've had people say, well, we follow our own procurement procedures. They're documented, but either state or federal are more stringent, so they have some compliance issues there. Okay, sorry. So just to continue with procurement, you must comply with the following federal standards. The first one, provide full and open competition. I think for the most part, we understand what that means. Second, conduct all necessary affirmative steps to ensure the use of minority business, women-owned enterprises, and labor surplus area firms when possible. So essentially what this is saying is that non-state applicants must engage these categories of socioeconomic firms in the procurement process, but this also means that you are not required to set aside awards for them. To engage them in the procurement process, non-state applicants just must take the following steps. And this is what I mostly get questions on, and they say, how do we do this? Place qualified socioeconomic firms on your solicitation list. Assure that they are solicited whenever they are potential sources. Divide total requirements into smaller tasks. Establish delivery schedules where the requirement permits, which encourage participation by socioeconomic firms. Use the services and assistance of the SBA, Minority Business Development Agency, and require prime contractors to take steps 1 through 5 if they use subcontractors. So I can't reiterate how important it is that we do this, but also that you're documenting it. To just do it is not enough. So we have to make sure if you are soliciting and you're sending emails out, saving those emails and very specifically documenting why and what you did to be able to ensure that you did kind of, I guess, open up the opportunities for these types of businesses. The third one, excluding contractors that develop and draft specs, requirements, and statements of work. So what this might look like is if you're a roads department, you have one contractor that drafts the work, they cannot bid for the construction. And that's something that auditors definitely look pretty close at. The fourth one is maintain written standards of conduct covering conflicts of interest and governing the performance of employees who engage in the selection, award, and administration. This is another thing that auditors look very closely at, and to be honest, in Nebraska, this might be something that occurs more often than we think, and we just don't think about it. I think a lot of times in our smaller towns, it's someone's, cousin or uncle or brother that ends up winning a bid, and while that might not be the issue, I would definitely recommend selection, removing yourself from the selection and the award and administration of the contract if it is a conflict of interest, and have written process and policy for that as well. And the fifth would be maintaining records just to detail the history of the procurement. This is the most important part. I think, one of the most important. I don't think all of it's very important. But maintaining records just to detail the history of procurement action, it's required in the 2 CFR. In the best defense, this is your best defense in the event of an audit. FEMA does require non-state applicants to keep at least the following documentation. So keep going back to this when you're saying, have we documented this enough? Are we doing what we need to do? Why you chose your procurement method, example, keep the documentation explaining that the contract was for construction, so sealed bidding was the preferred procurement type. That's a good example for that one. Why you chose the type of contract you did. For example, documentation explaining that debris removal contract is a time and materials contract because no other contract type is suitable due to uncertain amount of debris, or that a firm ceiling price is included in the contract so that this contract will be monitored to ensure efficiency and avoid abuse by the contractor. So over document these things. One sec, I need a drink of water. Why you chose or rejected a contractor. For example, documentation explaining contractor X was rejected because it failed to submit the required bid bond, whereas contractor A was selected because it was deemed responsive, responsible, and had the lowest bid price. And lastly, the basis for the contract price. For example, documentation showing independent cost estimate was performed prior to procurement, that although the contract price is slightly higher than the estimate, this contractor had a superior technical solution and was selected as the most advantageous, and that the cost was further negotiated with the contractor to bring it bring it closer to the cost estimate. So when we're talking about procurement methods, and I'm focusing mostly on our local governments, just because that's the majority of our entities within this webinar. And if you're a state entity, you probably know what your procurement methods are. But FEMA really looks at the use of micro purchase, requires only one quote if the price is reasonable. Small purchase procedure, typically that's less than 150, but it's or comparable depending on what our state, or we have some other people from other states, or even what your local small purchase threshold is. Does require quotes from 3 suppliers. So once again, going back to documentation, even if you make 3 calls or 5 calls and you get 3 quotes, make sure you're putting down exactly who you called, what the quote was. I can't reiterate the over documenting. The preferred method for construction contracts is obviously sealed bidding. This is typically what we see the most within the PA program. I want to highlight that local and tribal governments must publicly advertise the invitation for bids. You have to put it out. And then competitive proposals. This is like RFPs for when conditions aren't appropriate for sealed bids. I want to talk just for a sec about the non-competitive proposal. FEMA may reimburse costs incurred under a contract procured through non-competitive proposal only when one or more of the following apply. And this is a question we get a lot. The item is only available from a single source. And once again, you have to be able to prove that. The public emergency for the requirement will not permit a delay resulting from competitive solicitation. So this is like when we really are trying to get power back on after an event. Obviously, FEMA does not want or require us to immediately bid something out. Obviously, they want us to restore power as quickly as possible. They do then look at where's that threshold between this being an emergency versus the line where you should pursue bidding out a contract. FEMA or the recipient, that would be us at the state, expressly authorizes a non-competitive proposal. And admittedly, that rarely happens, but I guess it could. Or after solicitation of a number of sources, competition is deemed inadequate. So don't just assume that oh, we're kind of in the middle of nowhere, we only have one contractor that can do it, that's good enough justification, I would say no. Definitely pursue some of those other things we already went over. Call a state if that's the case, and we can help walk you through it. Do realize that local governments must perform a cost or price analysis in connection with every procurement action in excess of the simplified acquisition threshold. That's a lot of words, but essentially if it's not one of those basic micro purchases, if you are going to be doing, the 3 quotes or bidding out, you do have to do a cost price analysis. The method and degree of the analysis does depend on the situation. For example, if it is one of the small purchase, I think an appropriate method would be making 5 calls or calling 3 at least and getting 3 quotes. If this is a big construction project and you're going to be bidding it out, definitely make some calls and get some quotes before, just so you can have an idea of what that number is going to be looking like when you do get bids in. But like I said, as a starting point, definitely make some calls and get some independent estimates before receiving bids or proposals. Talking about contracts, FEMA reimburses costs incurred with mainly 3 types of contracts. I would definitely try to stick to these types if you can. Fixed price, of course, cost reimbursement, and to a limited extent, time and materials. FEMA does not reimburse costs incurred under a cost plus percentage of cost contract or contract with a percentage of construction cost method on top of it. So if you have questions about types of contracts, give the state a call. Look on that PDAT website, and we'll just make sure that it's an eligible contract on the front end. It just makes everyone's life much easier rather than after the event. Those contracts are found ineligible later. Briefly, I just want to touch on what FEMA and what we see, I guess, as frequent sources of non-compliance issues. The first one's time and materials contracts. They can be used for a reasonable amount of time when either the other contract type is suitable, no other contract type is suitable, or if the contract includes a ceiling that the contractor exceeds at its own risk. So keep that in mind. Also keep a very high degree of oversight on that type of contract. Make sure you're monitoring that type pretty closely. The second is cost plus percentage of cost contracts. These are the types of contracts where a contractor's profit is based on the percentage of underlying project costs. You can see where that might have some issues, why the federal government might have issues. These types of contracts are explicitly prohibited by federal procurement standards and are ineligible for FEMA grant funding. And that's directly out of the 2 CFR 200. The third frequent source is piggybacking. That's adopting a pre-existing contract solicited and awarded by another entity. Non-state applicants, so our locals, considering piggybacking should closely examine whether use of another jurisdiction's contract would violate federal procurement standards. We just really have to keep a very close eye on the scope of work, essentially, and why they weren't procured in a compliant manner. Something we see within our state this occurring, especially, for example, the blizzard. Going back to the emergency circumstances, people had to get emergency contractors in there to restore power. But at what point then does it turn from emergency work to permanent work? FEMA essentially looks at it as when power's on for the most part. So using the same contractor that did the emergency work, then on permanent work, then would be considered a type of piggybacking. I had a couple calls on this week, actually. My recommendation in that instance would definitely make those calls, get some quotes. If then that contractor, they can bid again, but then once again continue to document it, and if they come in low, of course pick them. If not, make sure you're just documenting exactly why. For example, you already had an established scope of work that they were aware of. They already had they had decreased mobilization costs because they were already in the geographic area. at the time. So this definitely goes back to documenting everything. And once again, please communicate with the state if you have specific questions, and we will try to either find out the answer or connect with someone with FEMA's legal team to locate a correct answer. The fourth frequent source of noncompliance is geographic preference. This is something in Nebraska I know that we struggle with. Our locals must conduct procurement in a manner that prohibits use of statutorily or administratively imposed state, local, tribal, government, or geographical, preferences. So we're just saying that if you bid it out, you only pick the one because they are from in town. We just need to make sure that we are bidding out as fair and I guess as broad as we can get. Of course, the further you get out, the more expensive typically. But once again, going back to documenting. The fifth is awarding to contractors that drafted solicitation documents. We touched on this briefly, but we just must prohibit contractors that develop or draft the specs, requirements, statement of work from competing for a construction contract. And then the last one is suspended and debarred contractors. We need to make sure we don't award our contracts to suspended or debarred contractors. The way to do this is just checking the SAM database. It's sam.gov. You can check right there and do a search for suspended or debarred contractors prior to awarding the contract. Okay, that was a lot of procurement information. So if you do have any follow-up questions specific to procurement, shoot us an email or put it in the chat and we can look into that further. The next one is assessing eligible facilities for possible insurance. I just made a couple different notes on here, but essentially, if it's a facility that can be reasonably insured, consider getting insurance on it. The bottom line is that insurance payouts are often much faster and easier to deal with than FEMA. We'll say it, everyone that's been in a disaster will say it. You'll get your insurance money first. Just realize not all self-insured entities are recognized by FEMA as self-insured. This is something to look at now, and if you believe, I know we have some of our bigger cities that are considered self-insured, but we've had a little bit of issue with that. Touch base with us and we can look into that for you. And to follow up on that, if something is not insured and FEMA pays for it, typically there will be what's called an obtain and maintain requirement. So you'll still have to get insurance on it then. And if you do not comply with that, FEMA will deny and obligate funds. If you don't get insurance, we'll just say this. If an applicant does not maintain the required insurance, so for example, let's just say for an example with the 2011 floods, we had a number of riverfront facilities owned by cities that did have to then go purchase insurance. We do have to have that insurance to close the project out. You do have to provide a proof of insurance. But now it's been 7 years later. You let your insurance lapse and we have another flood this year, FEMA will not pay for it again. Also, if an applicant does not have flood insurance for a property located in an area that FEMA has identified as, that's an SFHA, it's a special flood hazard area for more than 1 year, it has been damaged by a flood, FEMA will reduce by the lesser of the maximum amount of NFIP or the value of the building. So essentially, if you can be covered by flood insurance and you're not, and you get damaged by a flood, FEMA will still remove what could have been insured. The fourth, and I know Donnie talked about this last week and we had a lot of questions on it, but just documenting condition of facilities, buildings, roads, bridges, and culverts throughout the year on blue sky days. And I just wanted to go back to why we have to do this. I don't want anyone to think that we're just coming up with some obscure requirement to make you guys go and just take pictures of bridges 2 times a year, just because. And we know that people don't have a lot of time to just be driving around, but we also realize that there's a reason behind this and that there's eligibility criteria that are aligned with this. So I just wanted to go back to the Papa G, our policy document, to hopefully explain why. So as far as minimum work eligibility criteria, this is what FEMA looks at when looking at work completed or to be completed is eligible. So the first thing, it must be required as a result of the declared event. So what that means is essentially we need to be able to prove that the damage happened because of the event. Yeah, sometimes that's easy, sometimes it's hard, but that's why we're really pushing the documenting pictures, maintenance plans and schedules, so that when we do an event, you can say, yes, we had just, fixed that road, we just maintained that road, we had just taken this picture, or we had just done recent repairs. And then it shouldn't be a question of whether it was a result of the declared event. Be located within the designated area. That's a pretty simple one to align with, and be the legal responsibility. So essentially, the applicant is responsible, typo there, I'll fix that, is responsible for showing that work is required for two reasons: due to an immediate threat resulting from the declared event, and to address damage caused by the event. So once again, this goes back, we have to be able to prove that the event caused damages, or that there's an immediate threat. In that case, it would likely be debris that we would be removing because it is causing an immediate threat resulting from the incident. So for debris removal, the applicant must demonstrate debris causing an immediate threat, and that threat was generated during the declared event. So pictures of trees on public property, maintenance records showing trees were properly trimmed or maintained is a recommendation that we would give. There's no standard. I got a question last week saying, are there any best practices or standards? Unfortunately, no. Going back to everything else, I think as long as you can document when things occurred and that you have a standard schedule or plan to do that, I hope that would be sufficient. For temporary repairs, mold remediation, permanent work, the applicant must demonstrate that damage was caused by the event. So FEMA does not provide PA funding for repair caused by deterioration, deferred maintenance, the applicant's failure to take measures to protect a facility from future damage, or negligence. I'll say something that we have had eligibility questions on quite a bit is deferred maintenance. Yes, we can say that this bridge was washed out during the flood with certainty, but was it being maintained to a standard prior to that might have prevented it? Is a common question that we get. Or a facility, had it been properly maintained before an event that might have made the damage worse or occur at all. So that's kind of the basis of why we're really pushing that now, kind of more than ever. I'm open if you have any ideas of creative solutions. Our staff has been trying to think about, and I've been talking to other states of what they're doing to meet this requirement, but we're open to, suggestions, or if you want to bounce off what you guys typically do, what your plan or your schedule is, shoot us an email and we'll go over that with you guys. So the next one, the fifth one, would be training. And of course, you guys are all here, so you guys are the best at the training one. But we really are going to encourage you guys to connect with your local emergency manager. If you don't know, every county in Nebraska has a local emergency manager by state statute. It might be a part-time EM, might be a full-time EM. Some of our emergency managers have regions, might have multiple, might have 2, 3, 4 counties. Either way, everyone has one. So if you do not know who your emergency manager is, go ahead and throw that in the chat, and one of the recovery staff will be able to connect that person with you. But just get with them regarding trainings or even exercises that you'd be interested in doing or want to see. If you want to go over your local emergency operations plan with your emergency manager, I'm trying not to use acronyms, sorry guys. We didn't touch on what the local emergency operations plan is. It falls under really our preparedness team here at NEMA. But if you have ideas for trainings or exercises, definitely reach out to your emergency manager. Establish those relationships when we're not in the middle of a disaster. A lot of times people see my name and I'll say, have you connected with your emergency manager? And they'll say, well, who's that? So our hope is hopefully from the local perspective, you already have a really good relationship with them and can connect with them even on blue sky days. If your entity is interested in more specialized training, contact NEMA. I think I mentioned this maybe in the first session, but we do offer what's called an Emergency Management and EM 101. And that's where our senior leadership staff are typically our assistant director and our 3 managers for preparedness, operations, and recovery will come out and do a very specialized training. If you want to hear about operations, if you want to hear what types of state assistance and resources that we have during an event, if you want to hear about preparedness, grants, whatever specific topics you're interested in, mitigation. And then even we've had a lot of local elected officials kind of interested in this one and wanted some specialized training on what is our role as an elected official during a disaster. We haven't touched on that a whole lot. If any of those topics or if you think of anything else, shoot me an email and we will try to get that scheduled. Like I said, that's typically an in-person training. They like to keep those small, pretty intimate so that they can have a really good conversation and it's not just a presentation. Also, we're open to webinars or virtual trainings like we've been doing here. Sometimes it's easier for people to be able to just do something like this rather than carve out some time to come to Lincoln for a training or even host one. Also would recommend looking at our NEMA training website, and I threw the link in, or excuse me, the link right there for upcoming training opportunities statewide. We try, I know our training team does post our state-hosted trainings, but they do really communicate with our local emergency managers to get any trainings posted on there. So if you see something on there, definitely would encourage you guys to get registered for that. They're not just for emergency managers. The main premise of emergency management is to have everyone trained from the local all the way to the state level, and not just first responders. We really rely on, our finance professionals, our elected officials. Everyone has a piece of the puzzle, and we're just hoping to get some different kinds of trainings out there. So if you have any ideas, shoot those to me. And the last one we're just going to touch on, and this will take up the last little bit of our time, is register and begin uploading our annual documentation in the grants portal. So really quick, I'm just going to jump over to, there it is. I'm going to jump over really quick and try to get that up. So just a second. Okay, so right now you can see we have our grants portal up. I think this is still working. Let's see. Yep, we have our grants portal. This is what the login will look like. And for those of you that already have a login, you've seen this. But remember that your email is your login. We'll see if we can get it on the first time. Awesome. Okay, so one really cool feature of the grants portal is the dashboard. And this does look different. Like I said, as the state, we do have access to everyone's. So right now we currently have 150 entities registered within the portal. Awesome job getting registered. What this will look like for you guys is you can kind of set it up differently. There's some little widgets. So when you do have projects in here, you can monitor it. It'll tell you how many active projects. So once you get registered, just kind of get in here. And I mean, the best way I think to learn is kind of mess around, but I'll show you a couple different things that I think you guys will probably want to know how to do. So I'm just going to go in. Here's our entities that we already have registered. I'm going to go with our first one here, Adams County Emergency Management, because you're our first one, alphabetically. So this is actually what it will look like from your guys' perspective. Your organization profile is kind of where you camp out as far as Blue Sky Day. This is where you can upload things. This is where you change permissions, add personnel. And I'll just walk through a couple of things on here. Under personnel, manage. Once you are in, you can add your own. You can add staff. So right now we have the 2 emergency management professionals in there. But up here you can go ahead and create. So for example, you might want to have your emergency manager in here. You might want to get some other people viewing viewing roles. So you can, it's up to you as an entity who you want in here. But then under manage, we'll go to Donna. Under roles, this is where it says what she has responsibility. So she has been assigned the PA coordinator and the organization admin. But in here, so example, if you do want to add, let's say your mayor, they might not have an administrative function, but they just want to be able to view it. You can add them and give them different roles. So under manage, there's a number of different roles. If you hover over the question mark, it kind of tells you what those responsibilities look like. In here too, if you have multiple people in with certain roles, you can send password resets. You can disable if someone leaves your account. I would definitely recommend having more than one person in your personnel, just because with turnover, people do leave, and we just want to be able to have access to the accounts. But us at NEMA as well, if you are locked out or you have any questions, the NEMA staff is more than happy to assist the best we can. As I said in webinar 1, we're still definitely learning this alongside you guys, and it does constantly change. About every 2 weeks, they do a push they take suggestions from the open disasters. So if we get in a disaster and you say, man, I wish this was in there, I think we should do that. Up here, actually up here, if you click in here, there's an ability to submit feedback. But even we're back to the main profile right now. And then ones I just want to highlight really quick is insurance profile. As far as Blue Sky Day, you can upload insurance documentation annually. You can just do that by clicking this. For PA event requests, we're having audio issues. If anyone can hear me, can you put it on the chat? I think sometimes the phone number goes out, so if people are calling in on the phone, I think that might be issues there. If someone's on your computer and you can still hear me, can you let me know? Okay, it must be, they'll just have to recall in. Under event PA request, once you do submit an RPA down the road, that will be listed here. So for example, if we're on Adams County and they happen to be in several disasters, this is where it would list their RPAs that they have submitted, and it'll show the disaster number. One sec. Can someone tell them that they need to call in the number again? Very strange. They might just need to come out and in again. As far as documents, this is really where you're going to want to camp out on Blue Sky Day. Here's where we want you to be uploading your annual documentation. So right now it says this organization has no documents. If you go to Manage, Add Document, this is where you can be uploading some of the documentation we talked about in the first one. So ones we would suggest putting in here right now, let's go down here. Debris management plan. If you do have a debris management plan, I think we have several counties that have FEMA approved debris management plans. Go ahead and you can upload that now. If you have any just general, a lot of this is disaster specific, which you wouldn't want any of this would be specifically pertaining to a disaster, and you wouldn't want to upload that until we do have an approved disaster, and in that case, this isn't where you would upload it. These are just types of categories of things that will eventually get uploaded. General insurance documents are another thing. General photos, maps, and sketches. I had some people ask, where can we upload maps to show where our bridges are or where our facilities are? We have photos. Here's where you can upload those. Your PNP information, if you're a PNP, this is where you would want to upload that information, because if and when we are declared and you're included, FEMA will want to see proof of that you're a nonprofit. Procurement information, here's where you put your procurement policy. Let's see, you can see they really have an enormous amount of categories of topics of documentation. You can add mutual aid agreements. There's another one you might want to put in on Blue Sky Days. And once it's uploaded in the organization profile, that stays with them. That stays in the profile no matter the disaster. So types of things you want in here are things that no matter what type of event or what type of disaster, you can leave in here annually. Photos, there's again another PMP charter and bylaws. There's the procurement policy. Eventually, if and when we do get in a disaster, these are categories of things that will eventually need to be uploaded. But just for right now, when we send out our email, our follow-up email, we can give you a short little list of good recommendations of things to be putting up right now. And as you can see, there's eventually when we do get a disaster, this will look a little bit different, but under my tasks, it'll have, if FEMA has questions for you guys, typically in the past they would be sent via email or even a phone call. If your project has stopped at a certain point in the workflow and they have questions, we talked about these in the first one, the essential elements of information. It'll pop up as a task. So if they're waiting on you to do something, that will show up under tasks. Nothing now because there are no tasks. My best recommendation is definitely get Patrick your information so we can get you registered. And then once you get in and get your personnel added, that is when we can walk you through how to do specific things for your entity. And if you do have more specific questions, we can assist you then. The second thing I do want to show you is our NEMA Public Assistance website. If you just go, this is what it looks like if you just go to nema.nebraska.gov. If you go to recovery and drop down to public assistance, here's our public assistance website. Here's the first two webinars. You can watch them here, or here's the PowerPoint. Maybe by the end of the day, we might have today's up. We'll see how that goes. Over here, there's a number of very useful things. For our county EMs or even your local, our municipalities, if you're curious what the county thresholds are for federal disaster declarations, you can click that and that'll show you your thresholds by county. If you do have an event and you want to start tracking, or eventually when we do have projects written and you need to submit your documentation to NEMA for reimbursement, you can click here and that will give you a fillable Excel spreadsheet of the forms that Donnie showed last week. He showed a couple PDFs where it said labor, equipment, things like that. That's these forms. These ones look a little bit different though because they are Excel rather than PDF. And they have some formulas that can calculate on their own. Just be aware that if you do utilize these forms, the equipment codes are not the most current, so that's something we are going to be working on our end, is getting that updated, but also just be aware that those numbers have changed and we'll need to get that updated. Right here under new FEMA grants portal, here's the spreadsheet that Donnie, let's see if it'll work. Donnie talked about last week. Oh, it showed up over here. Here's that spreadsheet that we will be utilizing to submit our damages into the portal. So there's the Excel file right there on our website. And then the grants portal user manual, this is the most updated version of the manual. Like I said, they continually kind of update, and we'll do our best to keep the most updated user manual. On there too, if you click that, it has the FEMA hotline, like I said in week 1. You can call our staff and we'll try to help you the best we can, but we might refer you to that 800 number because those are portal professionals, I suppose, and they hopefully can get you the answers pretty quick. Other important documents, here's the policy guide, like I said, for 16, 17, and 18. Remember how I talked about we used to have old 500 series were for our old disasters, so we'll keep that up here for some of our older disasters until they close. As you keep going, that chart, that map of the state of Nebraska, this one where I showed all the disasters, that's on our website now, so if you want to use that for anything, feel free. Just some of our authorities, the Stafford Act, the 44 CFR. Here's the equipment rates. Like I said, the 2017 is the most current. Also some debris management guide. And then there's a little bit of information on procurement and contracting down here too. So definitely look into this, really good resource, lots of good information. If there's something that you can blatantly think should be on there, please let us know and we will think about putting it up. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of things that should be on there that aren't. I'm going to go back real quick to the slides just to finish up. I showed you the grants portal, so there's the link. I would definitely encourage you to make that a favorite on your browser. There's our our NEMA PA website right there as well. I talked about the procurement disaster assistance team and all the really good procurement resources, so there's a direct link. I talked about new equipment rates on week 1, and some people were emailing asking about where I can find those, so there's the link. And for the new policy guide, this link will actually take you to all of the policy guides. So go ahead and click there, and that will take you, as well as on our website. I know that was kind of a hodgepodge of things, but from a state perspective, we just wanted to give you guys some, well, easy in quotes, some things to be working on now if you're not already involved in this blizzard. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll hopefully get this recording posted here pretty soon, and there's all of our contact information. I think that the gentlemen have been reviewing the chat, but let's look really quick and see if I have any that came straight to me. Thank you everyone that sent who's attending. Once again, just a reminder, if you do have multiple people attending right now, please go ahead and send me their names and we'll get them on our rosters to know that they were counted and get them a certificate. I'm not seeing any specific questions to Molly, which is good. One more reminder, if you are an entity that should be in the portal, and let me just follow up on this again. If we have a disaster and you are included in that, that might mean townships, municipalities, county governments. I'm talking about county roads, talk about county clerks, the emergency managers, of course. Even we've had fair agricultural societies, so fair boards. I mean, if you are a type of entity that could be involved in the disaster, not just emergency managers, we need to get you in the system. This also looks like our PPDs, our natural resource districts, our state entities, so Game and Parks, State Patrol. We're trying to get PMPs, our nonprofits, in as well, but they're a little bit harder to kind of get organized, I guess, on the front end. We need to get you access. So if you are the person that should be the authorized rep from one of those entities, we can get you access to the portal. So please send your entity name, your name, your phone number, and email to Patrick, and he will get the invitation sent out. Once again, reminder that just sending your information to him doesn't mean you're in the portal. It does require you to accept it and to resend it back to him. Okay, so I am not seeing any other specific questions. So if you